So, spoiler alert for today's classic episode. We learned a lot in the years since we first recorded this, and some of the things that we thought were crazy a few years back are, what would you say, guys? Not so crazy.
Not so crazy. That's exactly how I would say.
For sure.
Hey, have you ever heard of the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program? This is around the time when Ben and Noel and I were learning about it. So, ooh, yeah. Enjoy this one.
From UFOs to ghosts and government cover-ups, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
Greetings, listeners. My name is Matt.
And I'm Ben.
And this is stuff they don't want you to know.
Nice. I like how it's a little bit different every time.
Yeah.
With the music as well. Then it's different every time, and it's never a disaster. I saw something that I think is going to be a disaster recently on television, Matt.
Yes.
Now
was it America's Got Talent?
It was close. It was, I don't have cable, right?
Okay.
I do have Netflix, and I'll sometimes watch things online on Hulu. So I was watching this thing on Hulu, and Hulu has a bunch of commercials, right?
Sure.
Commercials for days. Well, they had this one commercial that freaked me out a little, man. It was a McDonald's commercial. In this McDonald's commercial, they say, "Oh, you love Coca-Cola? Well, guess what? All Coca-Cola is going to be $1, whether it's a small, a medium, or a large."
I heard about that.
Just $1. Now, I think of that more as perhaps a health disaster for some people.
Because why would you pay $1 for the small one?
Yeah, does the same thing go with the water? I don't know.
Oh, God.
I guess no one really orders supersized water.
I do if I've got rehearsal for band. I go and I get the largest bottle of water I can possibly get. And then I use it for the next couple weeks until I feel the plastic has been used enough.
Starts to taste of plastic. Well, the disasters aside, and do let us know what you think about this weird Coca-Cola madness. Those sorts of disasters aside, rather, you and I are here to ask a question that we have talked about in our video series for years, literally, in many different ways, right?
Yes. Can humans, in some way, shape, or form, create natural disasters, or at least disasters that would normally be naturally occurring?
Okay, so natural disasters, then what kind of stuff would that be? What would be a natural disaster?
You're looking at everything from hurricanes to earthquakes. Those are the two probably main occurrences.
Yeah.
There are also
tornadoes, tsunamis, right?
Just anything you can think of that would be a natural disaster. Is there a way that a human could harness the power to make one of those?
Like a volcanic eruption, right?
Yes.
We see that in science fiction or thriller films sometimes, where there's some supervillain who is setting out to, make all of the world's volcanoes erupt at once or something.
That's also where they keep their layers. So I'm a little confused about why they would want the things that are right next to their layer to explode. I don't know.
You gotta find a good caldera, or really the moon base is the way to go. But we're differentiating here between things that would be man-made disasters. Man-made disasters would be things like a financial crash, like the Great Depression. In many ways, a man-made disaster. Now, of course, I know a lot of people can write in and say the drought created the Dust Bowl. Also, financial handling by people in urban environments and financial centers of the time. Their behavior didn't help. I think it accelerated it. So we do know that human beings have it well within our collective grasp to make disasters for ourselves.
Well, sure, war creates a type of disaster.
Yeah, war. That's a great example. That's one of the best examples. Diseases that spread via humans, that could be a disaster.
Oh yeah.
There are numerous things. pollution sites, can be disastrous. History class, our buddies over at Stuff You Missed in History class have a couple of great podcasts about very strange disasters that have occurred, such as a molasses flood, or a flood of, I think it was gin somewhere in London.
It sounds familiar. I need to catch up on that show.
Human beings, let's just point out, human beings have a propensity for, making trouble and getting into hijinks. But aside from these things, the question is, if humans could create natural disasters, and I like that you said in some way, then how would these things be created? Like what's something that people bring up when they talk about this?
The tools that could be possibly used to make these things. Well, one of the most popular ones is the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, or HAARP. You've seen it before. You've seen it on YouTube all over the place. We've covered it many times. We just did another video on it. Mm-hmm. It's this research station in Alaska, in Gakona, Alaska, I believe. Yep. This is one of the main HAARP stations. There are numerous stations that throughout the world that do the same research.
But this is like the crown jewel that the Air Force owns.
Yes, and I believe it was the original station, the HAARP station. Mm. I'm not sure if that's correct.
That we know about.
Yes, and it is unclassified.
Right, yep.
And it's run by the Air Force. I believe, I can't remember, I think the Navy had a hand in it at one point.
In partnership with a couple of other organizations, and currently it may be sold to the University of Alaska if they're willing to come up with the scratch.
Well, it's something like $5 million just to run the thing for a year, and that's just to make it work.
And what HAARP does is it shoots radio beams into the ionosphere, which is a way out of the way place in the atmosphere that a lot of human beings really don't have any call to ever reach unless we're going through it on the way to space.
Yeah, when you think about the ionosphere, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Ben, if you've ever seen the northern or southern lights, that's activity that's occurring inside the ionosphere when these charged particles are being activated essentially by the sun.
Right, and HAARP managed to, the HAARP in Gakona, Alaska, managed to create the first recorded artificial aurora borealis, which was really neat. I do have to say though, there's a little bone of contention I have with some of our YouTube listeners said, there are HAARP stations everywhere. That's not correct. There are ionospheric research stations everywhere. They are not HAARP. That's like saying, that's kind of like saying there's a Toyota Corolla in Gakona, Alaska, and there are cars in other places, so there are Toyota Corollas across the world.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
At one point before we continue here, now HAARP itself closed down, but it's not unusual for it to close down. We have a lot of this stuff in our video on HAARP, our latest video, one of my favorite titles, what the hell is going on at HAARP?
Yeah.
Or what the hell are they doing at HAARP or something like that?
Something to that effect.
Yeah. And, in there we talk about the HAARP station. There are other ionospheric research facilities in the world, across the world, but they are not the HAARP that we're harping on.
Oh, wow.
I know.
Well, okay. So this is I don't know what else I can say about this. It's fascinating to think. It kind of harkens back to the ideas of Tesla. At least that's what rings in my head when I think about HAARP and testing the ionosphere and what can you do with it. Although it has nothing to do with, well, at least to my knowledge, has nothing to do with somehow connecting electrically to the ionosphere.
Yeah.
The way Tesla wanted to. Man, we're going to have to republish that Tesla video soon, aren't we?
Yeah. I'd like to do a whole new video on Tesla, because there's a lot of interest in it. And, that was one of the situations where we found there really was perhaps some stuff they don't want you to know. And before we move on from the subject of HAARP, we should point out that, Matt, as you said, it's not it's not a top secret facility like Groom Lake, or like the, whatever is happening on Diego Garcia, right? Mm-hmm. This is a place where, while it was open, scientists would be glad to give you knowledge. I'm sure there were some things that were classified, but they would be glad to give you a look at what they were doing, talk to you about it if they had time. I don't know if you could just go up there and get a tour, but it had a chain link fence around it. It's not a high value target for a lot of people. The research that they were doing, if we understand it correctly, is to see how changes in the ionosphere can affect communication. That's one of their big things. So this is big because it goes into stuff like how an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile, will be able to guide itself or stay guided, right? How radio communications could be altered, or even satellite. And for it to affect the weather, what we were finding is that it would have to be, just from the kind of equipment they have, it would have to be on a much more massive scale.
Yes.
And it seems like at least the HAARP facility there in Gakona was not large enough to really, really shake the foundations of the earth and change the weather. But we have other ways of changing the weather, and they're very old. They go back to like World War I and stuff, right?
It's true.
So, what's the theoretical side? If everything we do know about HAARP that's publicly available is smoke and mirrors, smoke on the water, right? To quote the oldies song, then what are the theories about HAARP?
So there are several. One of the main ones that you hear a lot is that it can somehow shoot an energy beam, a radio energy beam, into the ionosphere, and then somehow change the direction, or by angling that beam in a certain way, to have it kind of arc around the Earth and then come back down in a certain spot. And then in that spot, the ionosphere, because it has a connection with plate Earth movements, with tectonic movements,
plates,
well, at least the tectonic movements seem to affect the ionosphere, which does not necessarily mean the ionosphere affects the tectonic movements. However, in this theory, because they've kind of aimed the ionosphere and changed it a little bit and sent it downwards into the Earth, it would create an earthquake in that position.
Right. And we know that, as we said in our videos, that our buddies Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and Hugo Chavez, I do say that a bit sarcastically, both in 2010 alleged that HAARP directly was involved with creating natural disasters. I think Ahmadinejad, as we say in our video, blamed the Pakistan floods of 2010 on it, and Chavez blamed the Haitian earthquake on it. And
well, and you made a great point, Ben, that one facility perhaps doesn't have the power to do something to that effect.
Is it possible that there's a massive facility somewhere else?
Or what if a lot of these ionospheric testing facilities are working together, Ben? Like, honestly, what if there are several ionospheric testing facilities? Say there are a couple in Europe somewhere, there are a couple in Asia, a couple in the US. They all work together. Whoa, man.
Not bad idea. A networked disaster club, right?
Highly improbable, but it would be fascinating.
Possible. I don't know. You and I haven't been everywhere. We'd have to go check it all out first. One thing that we do know that sounds crazy, but is completely true, and we've covered this before as well, is weather modification. And this can relate to natural disasters, but walk with us here for a second. So turns out you can shoot silver iodide into the sky, and although there are varying degrees of success, there's a lot of healthy skepticism about this, it seems that it has the potential to create rain clouds.
Well, yes, but you certainly need the moisture in the air already,
right,
in order to make it happen. And it's something like 40, I think the success rate was less than 40%.
Yeah. Less than 40%, more than 5. They being human beings throughout history, have tried to work with this existing technology and find different ways to modify the weather. However, we know that when experiments began with it in the United Kingdom, there were reports that it triggered flooding. We know that the largest weather modification network in the world, at least the one that the public knows about, is in China. And there are people who have part-time jobs where they just shoot silver iodide into the clouds and hope that this could somehow, provide favorable rain conditions for their local area. However, we know that when water gathers in one place, it comes from somewhere, right? So it's completely possible that weather modification past a certain threshold will create a situation in which we will see an increase in things like drought, or maybe an increase in the frequency of flooding or things like that, because we're messing with a system we don't understand. I know how B-movie that sounds, but it's true, which brings us to the other point. Climate change, man. Climate change. Global warming, it used to be called, and somebody won the buzzword war.
Yeah.
Somebody Bernaysed it into climate change instead of global warming.
Well, yeah, because it was so cold last winter, man.
Mm-hmm. I use Bernays as a verb now.
You got Bernaysed?
Yeah. I don't think it sounds like a sauce.
So this is a massive topic. This is a topic that I'm sure whoever you are listening to this, you have some very strong opinions about climate change.
Right.
And it's tough for us because, Ben and I want to learn the truth, or at least as close to the truth as we can possibly learn. That's what this show is about, and we want to be able to tell it to you. The problem is when you've got these extremely strong opinions, no matter what you and I say, or what even the science says, some people's minds will never be changed.
Well, let's present the gist.
Okay.
Here's the gist. We've got one side which says that there's one side that says that human intervention is making a measurable impact in the world. The primary arguments for a lot of climate change stuff concern the effects of the human population on the atmosphere, right? Mm-hmm. So CO2 emissions get caught up in this, but you'll also hear stuff about damage to the ozone layer, the amount of pollution emitted by factories and by motor vehicles.
Factory farming.
Right, I was going to say, and livestock, which are, on our show, one of our other shows, Car Stuff, we have a great episode about whether cows or cars are more responsible for pollution.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really weird thing to walk through, but I recommend it if someone's interested in that. So what we have found is that for a long time, the people tied up in the research on this had a vested interest, in some cases an agenda. There are cases where evidence that didn't fit an official narrative was repressed. And in most of the cases that I've heard, this was evidence where scientists would say, well, we have found this rise in temperature over this time. It correlates to factors X, Y, and Z. Therefore, we think that human beings are having an effect. And then the people who were funding the study didn't want to hear that. So they said, oh, okay, go do the math again.
Yeah.
Just go do the math again, and if you want to keep your job. But then on the other side, we have people who say that there is a concentrated, active conspiracy to propagate this idea of enormous cataclysmic environmental change, and that this is happening because this is happening because it's a way to scare people into giving up their means of production, which would make it easier. A lot of these ideas are tied up into the concept of a one world government, new world order sort of thing. The question then becomes one of scale. So the argument here against climate change is often, human beings cannot do enough. We're not big enough really to affect the great machine that is the world. Just like HAARP is not big enough really to affect the great machine that is the ionosphere. And
yeah.
And it's strange because there can be some contradictory reasoning there. There can be people who don't believe that climate change is real, but do believe that HAARP controls the weather. Mm-hmm. And so it's an interesting cognitive dissonance. But one thing we do know is that when we talk about scale, we're not just talking about amount of people versus size of the world. We're talking about time of people. So agriculture can cause climate change as well, because we're changing the types of plants, we're changing the type of livestock that interact in a biome. So it's not necessarily a worldwide climate change, right? Human beings can be possibly responsible for things like desertification, where the desert just starts eating places, right? Mm-hmm. And erosion. Human beings can clearly be responsible for erosion. Climate change is not just a matter of calculating pollution, right? So there's the other part, and I know I'm going on a rant here, Matt.
It's okay. I'm letting you go.
There's another part here that comes in with this. Speaking of scale, the world's climate system is extraordinarily complex. We don't really know what's going on with it. Meteorologists are scarily accurate, within, the short term before or after stuff. But the further out you go, there are just so many variables that we don't really understand the system in which we're participating. And whenever there is a huge chance for unintended consequences, it usually means that there's not a clear-cut, clean answer, but human beings on the whole have already been changing the quote-unquote climate, the way in which it's focused now, the way in which the debate is framed is designed to fool the average member of the public into just dwelling on one aspect of how human beings influence the world. And could that create disasters? Maybe.
I would just have to say, Ben, after listening to Bill Nye talk on multiple things, and people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and other people in the field of science that I respect their opinions, I would say, because I am not a climatologist, I'm not a scientist, I didn't go to school for any of that. So it's difficult for me to really give an opinion that in any way matters, in any shape or form. However, I would say that from what I've learned from them, the prevailing science says that humans are affecting the overall biome and the climate on the Earth. Mm-hmm. And the conspiracy side would most definitely be that there are interests in the energy field that would rather maintain the status quo of, burning fossil fuels in our vehicles and, having coal factories, clean coal factories.
Large farms.
Yeah. I think that would be the conspiracy side, in my opinion.
I also think that at this point, I haven't seen any compelling evidence of a attempt to fake global warming or climate change. I have seen compelling evidence of attempts to suppress that sort of ongoing research. And speaking of the interaction between business and science, there's another thing that we did that we found out was a truth is stranger than fiction situation, right?
Yes. In our attempts to extract as much oil as possible from the earth.
Whoa. And natural gas.
We've decided to come up with this thing called fracking. That's at least what we call it, hydraulic fracturing. Mm-hmm. And it's a fairly simple, well, it's not a simple process, obviously. It costs a lot of money. It's complicated, but the idea is simple. You send down a drill into the earth, into rocks, and then you force this highly pressurized liquid, which is hydraulic liquid and chemicals.
Like water, sand, a couple of chemicals, some, I think methylenes or something-ings.
Yes. And you force the rocks to break open. You frack those rocks right open, and that releases some of the natural gas that's trapped in there. And the oil. And the oil and all the great things that you can burn for profit.
So there's an ongoing debate. This does pose a risk to groundwater, because it is forcing things that are dangerous for human consumption into the ground and through the water table, deep into the ground. And, the argument is there are safe ways to do it. How do you do it? There are these wells wherein the used liquid is stored. There are also some fairly compelling studies that breaking the rocks under the mountains, under the towns, under the cities and the fields, that this can make the ground unstable.
That's crazy.
Who'd have thunk? And the problem is that, we can only estimate how much the effect would be in a lot of ways. So it is possible that fracking can induce earthquakes, which makes it a man-made natural disaster. Not the same way that HAARP or, going back to the network of ionospheric, which is diabolical. I love it. If it's not that same level, but it is possible. And in some cases, people have already started tracing fracking to, earthquake events. I think specifically in 2008, 2009. I have a question though about what we have on our outline is the elephant in the room, Matt, which is human population and global development. Are more natural disasters occurring or natural disasters becoming more dangerous, more expensive, or is it just that there are more people in more places?
Can I just go with all of the above?
Yeah, sure.
Because, sure, if you look at the Haiti earthquake, the recent Haiti earthquake, there are so many people living, just a ton of people living in structures that are dangerous when there's an earthquake. And that's how a lot of people get hurt. I mean, if you live in a place that is not prepared, from a technology or an infrastructure standpoint for this kind of natural disaster, if a hurricane rolls through or a giant tornado rolls through and the buildings in which a large group of people are living in are not prepared for that, then that's how you get disasters. That's how you get deaths, at least lots of deaths.
So I think that's a very good point. We have more and more people and they're increasingly moving to formerly inhospitable environments or environments that are transitioning to an inhospitable state now because of all the other people who are there. A lot of the air in India and China is filthy. A lot of the contamination problems that we sort of kicked the can down the road on for a few decades, right, are coming back to bite us because people are moving into those areas. And what we're finding then is, what we're finding are some weird, ugly truths. One of the questions that I was thinking about asking you is, if you looked at it objectively, we're listeners, Matt, if all of us were aliens, right? And everybody who listened to this show arrived on a spaceship to check out Earth, would we think that humans were the natural disaster?
Well, we'd probably think of them as a cancer of some sort. Joe Rogan has a great
virus
speech. Yeah, when he's flying over LA and just looking right before he got to LA, he's looking at California and the beautiful, just the way, man, this is an amazing looking planet. And then all of a sudden there's,
fields.
The protruding gray, just nastiness and smoke. So yeah, Ben, I think about even the Matrix lines about humans being a virus.
Right,
and that stuff really resonates with me because I don't know, I want to feel more connected to the planet a lot of times, and most of the time I don't. I wonder if that's just something ingrained or something that we have done to ourselves, that we've programmed ourselves to feel separate.
That's a good question. And that's sort of in some ways that sounds like a cultural or psychological disaster. I think that what we're going to see over time is that if the technology does exist to create natural disasters, to create, gigantic earthquakes, mudslides, and so on. Another side fact, North Korea was mentioned as one of the places that was victimized by natural disaster when they had, I think, a series of floods a few years ago. But if that technology did exist, it would be something that world governments and non-government agencies or organizations tried to at least have access to. We mentioned a quote several times, once in What the Hell is Fracking and once in our video on earthquakes, that Secretary of Defense William Cohen talking about the possibilities of future war, including stuff like tailored viruses, right? Tailored bugs.
To take out a certain population.
Right. Scary stuff. And increasingly, I won't say probable yet, but increasingly possible. And then we've got one of the other things he mentioned, and he's not the only one who mentioned this. Foreign ministers in Russia mentioned this kind of stuff too. The concept of eco-terrorism, destroying, which is an idea that goes way back to siege days, when you could destroy your opponent's access to food or clean water, right? Or just throw, plague bodies into the well, that kind of stuff.
God. Diabolical.
Yeah, but now on a worldwide scale. At this point, we should probably go. It looks like our buddies from Stuff Mom Never Told You, or people are coming by the studio window and giving us the eye. Josh came by a second ago.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
All right.
So we better get out of here. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. We didn't have a sponsor for this. For some reason, Illumination Global Unlimited decided not to sponsor our episode. I don't know. Maybe it was
conflicting interests.
It was conflicting interests.
Just for this episode. They'll be back though.
Yeah, weirdly enough, we just got a weather report that says a big storm is moving in.
What? Oh man.
Do you hear that?
Yeah.
We better. Well, Matt, where can people find us, hopefully?
Well, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter. We are at Conspiracy Stuff.
And that's the end of this classic episode. If you have any thoughts or questions about this episode, you can get into contact with us in a number of different ways. One of the best is to give us a call. Our number is 1-833-STDWYTK. If you don't want to do that, you can send us a good old-fashioned email. We are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.